Okay, well, good evening, everybody. In 2 days will be the 10th of December, and the 10th of December is the World Human Rights Day. For this reason, but also for many other good reasons, we decided together with the Robert Kennedy Human Rights Foundation, and particularly with Kerry Kennedy, to organize this webinar. This webinar is indeed devoted to human rights in the age of social media. And it's really a pleasure to be able to do it together, Kerry, and to have your time. We really much appreciate that. But let me also thank the Italian court of your foundation. Let me thank Federico Moro, who's online, I guess. I see him. And Nino, are you there? Nino Mattarella. And Stefano Lucchini, I don't know if he's there, but he's there with his spirit if he's not online. And of course, Riccardo, who was one of the founders of the Italian section of the group. Just a couple of words on our association. Our association is called M&M, Idee per un Paese Migliore. It's not really a think tank, actually, because we write only when we have something to say. We don't write when we have a client to ask us to do something. We contribute on issues of public policies, and what I always say is we use the slogan in English, policies beyond politics. So now I should translate it in Italian, given that we are speaking English, but I don't have an Italian effective motto. So let's keep it to policies beyond politics. Indeed, the M&M gathers people from different backgrounds in terms of professions, skills and so on. We have managers, we have entrepreneurs, we have bankers, civil servants, diplomats, journalists, academics, and so on. But also from a different political spectrum. It's quite wide within certain limits. And we want to keep it like that in order to be able to reap the best ideas for our country and not only as much as possible. In any case, we're not here to talk about M&M. I have only the task to give the floor to one of the great members of M&M, and one of the Italian greatest journalists, Monica Maggioni, who will be moderating this webinar. I'm afraid Professor Posner will not be with us, but we will have a conversation with you, Kerry, and I think a few of our people will be very interested. All of our people will be very interesting to listen to you. A few of our people have also prepared some ideas on how to bring the conversation further. I'll stop here. Monica, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Fabrizio. And Kerry, it's such a pleasure having you with us this afternoon, and such a pleasure and such a great opportunity to discuss with you this issue of human rights in this perspective, being in the social media era, being in such a turmoil that we're going through, and we all think this is a key issue, and this is why we do think that having the chance to talk with you about this issue is key. Let me just give the floor to Federico Moro for a word about what's going on in the Italian chapter of your foundation. Then I'll be back to you and we'll start the discussion together.
Thank you.
Federico.
Yeah, thank you, Monica, and thank you, Fabrizio, for the invitation, and thank you, everyone, for attending. I don't know in US, Kerry, but today is holiday in Italy, so everyone are really, we are very grateful for all of you to be here today. Very briefly, RFK Italy is the oldest member of the RFK Human Rights family, so we have been established, as Fabrizio was reminding, by Kerry, Mariana Marcucci, Riccardo Monti, myself, 15 years ago. Our main goal is to keep alive Robert Kennedy's legacy in Italy with different projects. In particular, we work on education in schools, and this year we have dedicated, of course, at many other organizations, to translate our programs into innovation platforms to be used by students and teachers. And thanks to the reintroduction of the civic education in schools, we are now helping teachers to be trained on the new law and the new issues that can be taught in schools to students. So we have just finished an interesting program where 1,500 teachers across the country participated on WeSchool and Microsoft platforms. So we are very, very happy about what we're doing. And the second main program that I want to tell you briefly is related to COVID. Because of the emergency and thanks to our board of directors, we started like a bridge of support from US to Italy. And thanks to many donors in US and in Italy, we have raised like 800,000 euros that we have devoted to a project on the health and economic emergency related to COVID. So we are supporting the Italian Red Cross in Florence, Bambino Gesù Hospital in Rome, and the Caritas Ambrosiana in the Milan area. We are now working on supplying basic necessities to families in need and other projects related to the emergency. So I don't want to steal too much time. Thank you very much for the opportunity to tell about us. You can find more information on our website. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Federico. And again, Kerry, very happy to be here with you this afternoon. So we leave the floor to you just as a start of our discussion together. So please.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me say thank you to all of you for organizing this. A special thanks to my dear friend Federico Moro, who's the head of RFK Italy, Riccardo Monti, who is one of the founders, as you heard, and to all of our friends who are joining us today. I really hope this can not be a lecture by me, but a discussion with everybody, because it would be very helpful for me to hear your perspectives on these issues, how they impact Italy, how you see this from a European perspective. And, you know, we were joking with Andrea earlier about what the Biden administration should do in the wake of the massive turmoil of the Trump administration. But it would be really helpful to hear what the priorities are from your perspective. So I'll just say, lay out a couple of beginning thoughts, and then let's have more of a discussion. I think when it comes to human rights and social media, there are certain things that have really been beneficial to human rights because of social media. Google Maps documentation of mass atrocities and mass graves. I think the first example of that was in the former Yugoslavia, where we were able to look at Google Maps from 1 month to the next, find where the mass graves were, and hold the perpetrators responsible. That's been done again more recently in Syria, and a couple of years ago with the massive human rights violations in Myanmar with the Rohingya population. Second, faster mobilization to respond to humanitarian crises. And we've seen that all over the world, both after earthquakes and natural disasters, after the fires in California in the wake of the hurricanes, and more we're seeing in Honduras just this week. Another area is easier to organize peaceful demonstrators. So this is kind of a two-edged sword. We saw that especially with the Arab Spring. And then, of course, we saw the governments then follow all the organizers' Facebook posts, round them up and throw them in jail. So, of course, it's a two-edged sword. And then I would say crowdsourcing to document human rights abuses. This is being used as an example. Today in India, there's an extraordinary program which gets crowdsourcing around sexual assault and is able to hold the perpetrators responsible. And then there's an organization that I was actually involved with starting many, many years ago, 20, 30 years ago, called Witness, which gives basically started by giving video cameras, but now laptops and more and iPhones to human rights defenders to help them document abuses. And as you can imagine, there's an old saying in the press, if there's no photograph, nothing happened. So this is a way of really showing what happened and getting it right up on social media and being able to stop some of the abuses. So I just lay those out as some of the things, the positive things. Now on the negative side, I would sort of think about this in a few buckets. One is hate speech and assuring reliable information. So we see again and again, especially in the run-up to elections, that hate speech is used and that unreliable information, objectively false information, is put on social media, and the social media companies fail to take it down again and again and again, and that undermines democracy and foments further division in society, which is something none of us can afford, and I'd be happy to talk more about that. The second bucket, I would say, is privacy. Surveillance, so-called surveillance capitalism. The fact that so many of the sites like Google and others, their business model relies on gathering private information about all of us and using it in ways that are not transparent to from everything to selling us on goods and services, to rounding up people and throwing them in jail, and to much more damaging things. The third bucket, I would say, is access. So under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you have access. One of the first lesson plans we use at RFK, in our RFK Italy education program with students as young as 5 or 6 years old, is we say, what is the difference between your rights and your needs? And they say, well, I need, excuse me, your needs and your wants. I need food, I want pizza. So needs are what's declared in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and those include right to health care, right to a home, right to a family, right to water, right to food, right to education. One of those rights is the right to be wired to internet access, because otherwise you cannot be part of society. That is a new right, but that is a right that must be recognized. And of course, governments have a responsibility to recognize that right and provide that access, which is not uniformly being done. And then the fourth bucket, I would say, is around policing. The use of technology to police people, cameras on street corners, ankle bracelets that can that seem to allow people more freedom because they don't have to be in jail, but in fact can be used more massively. So in the end, more and more people are under surveillance. And then those are also algorithms that are used by governments and judges to decide who should be held in jail pre-trial and who should be released into the public. So things like that. So those would be my 4 buckets, and happy to talk more about it, but I'll just stop there to hear responses.
Thank you so much. Also because, you know, Kerry, you were just mentioning this idea of digital divide, and this is something which is having an impact these days. We're going through pandemic, and what we see in terms of education, in terms of access to technology and the possibility to be on the same level of opportunities is really key. So I do think that we can ask a few other friends to jump into the conversation. I see Silvia Francescona out there ready to jump in. So Silvia, if you want to react to what just Kerry was putting on the table, I think that the European perspective in this sense can also help.
Yes, thank you very much, Monica. It's great to see Kerry. Actually, Kerry, we spoke once in 2009, when I was at the Prime Minister office preparing for the G8. So I'm really happy to see you tonight here. I come from a background of international law and foreign policy and European affairs, so I have a little bit of that perspective. And when I think of, human rights, my issue is how can we be more effective in making human rights implemented. And I come to some contradictions, and I also find that at the end of the day, we end up in one single concept, which is hate. I try to elaborate these thoughts. There is one contradiction, which I think is completely surmountable, and is the fact that when we agreed on human rights, we want to work in a multilateral setting, of course, based on dialogue and have everybody on board. At the same time, when we speak out for human rights, sometimes the fact that you need to do it immediately requires also bilateral action, if not individual action. I'm thinking, for example, of Angela Merkel acting vis-a-vis the Navalny poisoning, and she immediately acted, providing, hospital and a flight for him, or also the words of Pope Francis with regard to violation of the Uyghurs' rights in China. So I think that sometimes all this is very effective, but then there is another contradiction, and here I come to Europe. You need to have your house in order to have the legitimacy to speak up, against the violations or abuses of human rights. And what I see in Europe is lately, and I see a lot of interdependence with what went on in the United States, is precisely that there is a degradation of human rights, and this erodes, if you want, the legitimacy of Europe of speaking up. The cases of Poland and Hungary, of course, that are basically hijacking Europe with regard to the old negotiations around the EU Next Generation Fund is just an example. Or you may be aware that Poland has already anticipated that it wants to leave the Istanbul Convention on violence against women. So this is something that worries me a lot, what's going on in Europe. And I think that this is very much given to, it goes around the whole idea of hate and hate speech that has grown a lot also amongst a European narrative and European leaders. Just a few days ago, Kerry, in Italy, the leader of the opposition, Matteo Salvini, spoke in a TV show saying, what are human rights? Who are going to define, who decides what human rights are? And some maybe European officers in Brussels. You know, there is a complete disrespect for the whole concept of human rights. And we are seeing this in particular in Italy from some people from the opposition, and as well as in some countries. Again, I do think that it all relates to hate. And this is what we have seen in the United States as well. And I do believe that now we do have a great opportunity to recreate that hope with the new US administration and a strong alliance between the US and Europe. And I do think that we need to work together on this, on, you know, strengthening the UN strategy plan of action on hate speech, for example. Italy has the presidency of the G20 already. It's just entered the 1st of December. There are initiatives that we can put forward. And I think that the new alliance with the US is key, because we have suffered in Europe, I think, a sort of, we have been in relationship with the United States, but we weren't ally, because an ally is someone you trust, is someone, you know, you speak the same language with, and we need really to regain that like-mindedness that we have lost. At the same time, and I conclude here, I do think that it is important that the European Union goes ahead with her own frameworks on human rights. There is no contradiction, even if there are countries that are not, you know, supporting human rights in Europe. I just mentioned yesterday, I think we adopted this global human rights sanction regime, which I think is extremely important and is such a step forward. Is basically a framework that allows the EU to target individuals, bodies, entities, state and non-state actors that are responsible or that are involved in, you know, serious human rights violations or crimes, and no matter where they occurred, as like genocides or crime against humanity or slavery, and also arbitrary arrests and detentions. And this is so, you know, unfortunately, it's so real in these days, like in Egypt. And this enters in a much broader framework, which is the EU action framework from 2020 to 2024. Having said that, it is important to go on that path. It is important to sort our problems in-house that we have in order to have that legitimacy to speak to Egypt, to speak to China, to speak to, you know, to those who have these serious violations of human rights in their territory. Otherwise, we lose our credibility. And I think the solution is precisely education and a sort of campaign against hate.
Okay, thanks, Silvia. Try to circulate a little more our discourse here. Let me just go for a second to Riccardo Monti. Then, Riccardo, I'll come back to you with a couple of specific issues. But you wanted to jump into the conversation right now. Riccardo, floor is yours.
Yes, for my background and also having been in government and international trade, of course, I feel a big attraction to the human rights in the sense that we just mentioned. Government, governance, big country, prosecution, China, North Korea, Iran, discrimination against women, against minorities. The effort we've been trying to do also with Kerry and with the RFK of Europe was try to, okay, what does it mean for the common people? No, we try to translate this that seems is very relevant, but also very far away into what does it mean for me Monday morning? And so the effort was, okay, what does it mean human rights if you're a kid in school in Calabria and maybe your friends is made fun of because a bit chubby or fat, or if your mother cannot go working because she's pregnant. So I think it's very difficult, and this is the effort we should do. And also this is probably on the 10th from Kerry. Kerry is very good at mixing these two. She goes to the White House to give the award to big defenders, and has been helping and supporting a human rights defender in every corner of the world where there is big human rights issue. And then also speaking to the common people and try to make them understand that this is relevant for their day-to-day. So again, it's not easy because it's very simple to feel this as a very remote problem. And thank God, we as a country, we are a democratic country. I don't think Italy has massive minority discrimination issue or massive Russian issues, but yes, it is a very relevant topic, a very relevant issue. And we need to be able to translate this sensitivity that is there into a very pragmatic approach. How do I defend human rights Monday morning when I go to work, I'm in a bus and something happened, or in school or the workplace? So Kerry is very good at balancing this, but this is particularly important because especially in Italy, for us, human rights is China, North Korea, Sudan, refugees, Rohingya, but human rights is here and now, and we need to also spread that part of human rights.
Ricardo, totally agree with you, just because we were just starting, speaking about education and digital divide, and that's so important. And Kerry was also mentioning, and that's so important in these hours in our country, privacy and surveillance capitalism, because that's a part of this new dimension of human rights.
It's a big threat. It's a big threat.
It's a big threat, but it's also something which shows different faces, because what is going on these hours in our country is quite important. I think we should all reflect on the fact that it took months to download the app for immune, the app for health, and in a bunch of days, with the cashback, 6 million Italians downloaded the app for cashback. So this is an issue, but on privacy and human rights, I think Andrea Cuomo wanted to jump in the conversation. Andrea, floor is yours.
Thanks. Let me start from far away. We are in a very utilitaristic society, and we have lost one thing, which is called humanity as a value. And this applies to what was saying before. Migrants we have here, it's winter, they sleep in the middle of the road, where we have free places in all barracks everywhere. And this is totally unacceptable. It's the loss of any humanity and the reduction of the ethical values. Without putting back ethical values in society, we are not going to solve any issue on human rights. This is my personal point of view. Now, if we go to the top layer of the Maslow pyramid and we look at data, first of all, companies talk about ethics, but normally it's window dressing. You don't really touch the fundamental issues. The second is that, and at the end, the way you manage your data is to maximize your business. The regulator is unable to regulate because normally it doesn't understand where technology is leading. And instead of regulating a priori, it comes into the picture when it's way too late and issues have happened. So the two actions that can take care is the first, go back to strong ethical values in government and install them in people. And the second is go back and try to establish communities, I would say commissions, call them as you want, who have the ability to regulate the future rather than the past. Without these two, we will always be catching up. And if it's not going to be the Microsoft of a few years ago, it's going to be the Google of today, and whoever is coming next, because technology is moving at the speed of light. And whatever you do on the present is going to be old in a very short period of time.
Kerry, I see you nodding. So would you mind to jump back into the conversation at this point?
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I'm nodding to Andrea because I think you're absolutely right. This comes down to a sense of humanity. You know, the opening of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says, we agree that every human being is born free and equal in dignity and rights. So that's to Andrea's point. We have to start with the sense of dignity. And to Sylvia's point, if you start with dignity, then you must find ways to be against hate. And, you know, I think that Sylvia is absolutely right. The hatred is probably the biggest threat we face on earth today. It's Boko Haram in Nigeria, it's ISIS in Syria and Iraq, it's Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, both at an all-time high in Europe. It's, you know, the last 4 years of President Trump in the United States. It's the Rohingya in Myanmar. It's native peoples everywhere. It's Bolsonaro destroying the rainforest and the native peoples in Brazil. I mean, I don't need to go any further. We all know. And it's the extraordinary rise of violence against women that's gone along with COVID-19. So we have to get back to that sense of dignity. And, you know, the biggest challenges I think that the Biden administration is going to face, and the world is going to face in 2021, is not stopping COVID and not grappling with the economic fallout from it, but finding ways to recommit our world to the ideals of dignity and humanity and basing our actions on love. And from there, we can face everything else. But that's really, in the end, that's what human rights are all about. It's not, as Ricardo was saying, this is not an abstract concept that only applies to people over there. You don't need a passport to work on human rights. None of us does. All you have to do is walk down the street and you see the violations, or open up the bedroom door and you'll see those violations. But I think that having people sort of understand it, understand what their rights are, understand their agency to create change, and giving the toolkit to create that change. That's the 3 steps of RFK Human Rights Education Program, which is taught in every province of every region of Italy to millions and millions of students. That's what we're trying to do. And I think I just had one other thought to this, which is that everybody on this call, from the ones I know and from the ones I'm seeing, you all look like you're in business in some way. Everybody here has been employed. And Ricardo, one of the places where human rights comes up every single day is in workplace dignity. Workplace dignity. That is inclusion in the workplace, making sure that you have a wide range of voices, that you have a wide range of people, different colors, different ethnicities, different religions in positions of power, that women are treated with respect, that everybody's treated with respect, and that there's a road to power, to becoming CEO, that doesn't have to do with your anatomy. But it also has to do with really creating a workplace based on dignity. To Andrea's point, it's based on dignity so that everybody can bring their best selves to work and not feel that they'll be intimidated. We have a whole program on that. Love to talk, maybe that could be a future conversation. But we're getting a little bit away from the digital issues, but I think it's important to base all of this in dignity and love.
I don't think we're afraid to move too far away because it's so connected. It's such a
That's true.
You know, same old story that comes out in different forms. So just on this issue, business and human rights, Andrea Goldstein, I think you could jump in.
Thank you, Monica. And thank you, Kerry, for this intervention. I work at the OECD, as you can see from the background. It took me 2 months to learn how to put it on, and now I just know
I appreciate it. I bow to you.
And no, actually, I'd like to pose 2 questions, actually to raise 2 issues and see what you think. And I have to do one, definitely with the digital realm. It's the responsibility of the larger firms that manage social media, and I think of Facebook and especially in Twitter and Google, and their responsibility in terms of defending free speech in countries which happen to be the fastest growing markets for them. Think of Vietnam, China, they cannot operate, but in Brazil, in Vietnam, in Southern, a number of African countries, in a number of Asian countries as well.
Andrea, you freezed.
Andrea.
Enough.
Andrea.
So you think that
Andrea, we lost you.
Andrea, we lost you for a few statements. So do you mind to just go back?
Burden of the responsibility, and so what are your views on that? And the second point, which again is, can you hear me? Because I see on my screen that my connection is unstable.
Now we can hear you, but we lost the second part of what you were just saying.
I was wondering whether Kerry thinks that there is enough which these companies are doing in terms of defending, upholding the freedom of speech in these markets. And the second one has to do with the responsibilities of firms, any firm, especially large firms, but any firms on the quality of their supply chain. Because one thing is to deliver on commitments to responsible business conduct at the level of the large firms. But as we all know, large firms operate thanks to and through zillions, thousands of smaller companies, which may or may not respect responsible business conduct principles. I think of the environment, I think of labor rights, child labor. And again, what are your views on this? Whether, again, bringing the digital technology in again, whether there is a real possibility that I think through blockchain technology, for instance, that they can better check their supply chains, whether they're making the effort to do that. So kind of general questions, but leading to the digital sphere.
Yeah.
Kerry, would you mind to react?
Yeah, I think those are both good questions. So there's always a dilemma when a company is doing business in a country which has rules or regulations that are at odds with their company values or their company policies. So it could be around free speech. It could be around, for instance, LGBT rights. What do you do when you're operating in Uganda and Uganda passes a law that made homosexuality punishable by life in prison without parole? And meanwhile, the CEO of your company that operates there is openly gay. What are you supposed to do? So I think these are issues that companies have been grappling with for a very, very long time. There's a couple of different ways that they can look at that. One is in the country in which they're operating, we comply with local laws. That to me is is a cop-out. Then they could look at the country where we were founded, and we will be in compliance with those laws. That doesn't actually do the trick either, because it's very complicated worldwide. I think really the only way to do this is through the International Human Rights Fora, and to make reference to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the UN principles on business and human rights, and those the foundational architecture of human rights, which companies can rely on, look to, and work with countries on, governments on. So I think that's one piece of it. But, excuse me?
And the OECD guidelines on multinational enterprises.
Yeah, and there's international guidelines that they can reference and be in compliance with, and that's what they should do. And there's a full architecture that's been built up over 70 years to grapple with those issues. The problem that the digital companies have, I think, is the biggest problem they have on this is their business model is based on getting as much, and this is especially social media companies, the business model is drawing as many eyeballs to that platform as possible. And the stickiest way to get eyeballs is to put something on there from an influential person which has enormous emotive content. An influential person with high emotive content. So when you combine, hate to keep coming back to him, and I can't wait till January 20th, and we'll never have to talk about him again. But when you combine Donald Trump, an influential figure, with hate speech, that draws people to the social media site, because it draws people on all sides. It draws people who agree, and it draws people who disagree, and it gets them having a conversation, and it pulls them in and it keeps them on that site. Ooh, what are my allies saying about this on Twitter? What are my allies saying about this on Instagram? And then they're stuck, and that's the business model. So they need to change that business model. And just going back to what Andrea said, which is just so fundamental, you need to have a business model that's based on dignity. And then that can drive your decision-making on how you conduct, how you grapple with this. That's one thing. Now, in the supply chain issue, also related to what we were talking about with Ricardo, workplace dignity. The workplace does not end at your door if you have a supply chain that goes further out. The workplace is all the way up and down the supply chain. So there's actually a really wonderful model that's proven to work in the most difficult arena, which is the agriculture arena. The agriculture industry is famous for abuse of workers, for sexual assault of women, for for stealing wages, for terrible working conditions, et cetera. And all of those have been mostly wiped out in South Florida in a place called, under the Fair Food Model. If you're not familiar with it, I could not recommend this more highly. It's actually being imported now to the tomato industry in southern Italy, which also, as we all know, is well known for having abuses of employees, of agriculture workers. But it's a model, basically, just very briefly, where they bring together all of the tomato pickers in this example, and they say, what are the rights that you need? What are the conditions you need in order to feel safe going to work, being at work, and going home after work. They write those up, then they go to all the companies that buy the tomatoes, and they say, will you agree to this code of conduct? The companies agree, and then the farms that buy the tomatoes have to be in compliance with that group, that litany, in order to have their tomatoes purchased by the biggest companies, the biggest supermarkets, etc. And it works. So that is now being used in Bangladesh, in the garment workers. It's being used on dairy farms in Vermont, and it's being used in other places around the world. So I think that a worker-led social responsibility model is very, very key in order to create change in the supply chain.
Sure. So you were demonstrating this model on human rights. Bariatti just mentioning in that you is working on this. Would you mind to do the conversation? Stefania?
Yes, here I am. The European Commission has launched a survey that is on these days for the next few weeks. They expect answers by February in order to prepare a draft directive on corporate social responsibility, which will tackle human rights and environment and climate change as well, in order to increase liability. We are studying it at different levels because of our issues of company law, obviously, and also of private international law. That is my field. But the issue here is to try to find out a way to harmonize the rules in all European member states, which would be a great step forward due to the possible divergences in the member states on the protection of human rights. So we will see where it goes and if it really leads somewhere. The second issue that I was discussing here in my comment is that last week, 10 days ago, a referendum in Switzerland rejected a proposal to increase the liability and responsibility of Swiss companies for their supply chain, their control companies and their controlled entities around the world. Because the issue for companies from the point of view of business is that it is very costly to be exposed to claims all over the world, and it would be better to and easier for them to have one forum for their conduct and to have one applicable law. They would prefer to be sued in Switzerland in that case and to have Swiss applicable law, which would probably be better for their counterparties as well, for the possible counterparties who are whose rights are infringed. Better to have Swiss law than the law of another country that does not recognize human rights. So the issues are hot and there are many on the table, but we are starting to discuss it indeed at European level. Switzerland, of course, is not a European EU member state. So it's a European country, but not a EU member state. So still some harmonization should come in this respect, this area.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fania, for adding point. But there's something a little bit missing in the picture here. So we have a little 20 minutes. We can discuss also another aspect. Alessandra Venturini was mentioning in the chat, I'm going to ask her to the conversation, the fact that very often when it comes to human rights, we have to do with trade-offs. Sandra. You there?
Yes, I'm there. The microphone was not working. Okay, my point is that human rights protection is a priority. We all know but sometimes it's very difficult to implement. In the short run, also the European Commission, with the Turkish agreements, has made a choice which was absolutely against many dimensions of the human right of the Syrian migrants that they were hosted in Turkey in camp, which were not protecting them. But this was the best solution in the short run. And this agreement were criticized all the time, exactly because they were unrespectful of human rights. But it was probably unrespectful of human rights for the Syrian, but for the Greek citizen instead, they were finding a solution. So there is a dilemma, which is not just a bilateral, is a multilateral one, and there is an effect in the short run, in the long run. This is the problem of protecting human rights. And I would like to comment on this, which priority should be put in advance.
Kerry, I know that you're running almost out of time, but I leave you the floor for this quick answer. Then maybe Fabrizio is gonna say goodbye to everybody.
Yeah, thanks. I think you know, I think the question is who's vulnerable, who's at risk, and how do we in the international community to protect those people who are most at risk. So certainly in that instance, people who are fleeing war, who have had their homes bombed, who have lost their loved ones, who are sick and on the run, their rights, their needs have to take priority. And then we look to internet, you know, you're absolutely right. This is not a bilateral issue. It's a multilateral issue. And it's a multilateral world. And I think just going back to what the Biden administration is going to face and what all of us have to face, everybody on this call is going to be facing, all of Italy and Europe is going to be facing, is how do we reestablish buy-in from all of our people into the international architecture of trade and peace and rights, which was created in the wake of World War II, which has kept Europe at peace for 70 years for the first time in 2,000 years, and has created a world in which Russia, the United States, China, and Japan have not gone to war over the last 70 years. I mean, there's been no hot wars between those countries. And if we allow this to break down, we will go back to war, and we need to stop that. So that's a basis for democracy. It's the basis for human rights. It's the basis for peace. It's the basis for trade. It's the basis for the economy. It's the sustainable development goals. And it's really, in the end, about building community based on love and generosity and respect for one another, the dignity that we've been discussing throughout this call.
Thank you so much, Karen. Let me thank you personally also for the fact that basically you're telling us this is going back to the basis of our society, the basis of our human life. And thanks for your passion and energy that you're using all the time to fight for these values. Now, let me give the floor back to Fabrizio for the conclusions. Fabrizio, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. I don't think I have the ambition to draw any particular conclusion from this very exciting and also, let's say, quite wide discussion. I just put down some, if you want, some motto which came out from what Kerry said, but also from what our friends from M&M brought up, and you know, they're just 4, but then I would like to make a proposal, because at the end of everything we do, we would like to be a bit concrete and to move the post forward. So I have pinned down reestablished buy-in from all the people, let's say in the value we created and we lived in the last 70 years. Recommit our word to the ideas and values, including humanity, the point of Andrea. You don't need a passport to engage in human rights. And this here we're getting more concrete and more, let's say, actionable. As the last point, which is workplace does not end at your door. I think in order to be a bit indeed concrete and to move forward, I would like to ask our friend and you know in the Italian section of the Robert Kennedy Human Rights Foundation and Kerry herself, if you're interested to continue the conversation with us with M&M. We haven't discussed it internally, but I think we will. Everybody will be very excited to do it in order to do perhaps some project together in the future. I don't know. I don't know what, but I'm sure there will be something good we can do together. Let's put it that way.
Fantastic. Let's do it. Love that.
Let's do it.
Do it.
And thank you, Kerry, for your time.
Okay, and thank you, everybody. Really, thank you for being here and caring.
Thank you, Kerry.
Love you guys. Love you, Ricardo.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Kerry,
Bye.
bye.
Ciao a tutti.
Bye. Bye-bye.